thanks to everyone for your patience. And now let's jump in. So, Matt, if you could once again, for the third time now, tell me your background. I'd love to hear it. And we can go into Astro after that.
Well, I hopefully I'm going to be good at this by now, but yeah. So I'm Matt. I'm an Astro core maintainer. I've been working. I've been on the Astro team for a bit over a year now. Um, Before that, I was at Gatsby. Well, no. Before that, I was at Netlify. See, I did this three times, and before that, I was at Netlify, where I was on the frameworks team, which meant that I worked with all the frameworks, getting them to work nicely on Netlify. And before that, I was at Gatsby, where I was on the core team there as well. So I've been doing a lot of framework stuff for a long time. Um, so and then I've been doing web stuff for a very long time, probably longer than some of our viewers have been alive. So um, I've seen quite a lot of it, and Astro's my favorite. So I'm very lucky to be paid to work on an open source project that I'm a really big fan of. So you know I'm and then I love talking about Astro. So it's great. Thanks for having me on your show to talk about it.
You're very welcome. Yeah. And I'm glad enough people still stuck around so we can have a great conversation. I would love to hear a little bit more about images. Astro's like Node.js by default is great, but a lot of times in a practical application, images can be the main thing that slows down a site, not JavaScript. So I'm interested a little bit more in like why are images so difficult? Like what are things that people typically get wrong? I know with a lot of your background with Unpick that you've worked on, like that's obviously been a big concern for you. So I would love to know a little bit more about images in general on the web and kind of things that people don't understand about it or need to optimize and don't realize it when they're first learning.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing about images is they were like one of the first things added to HTML. I think they were had their 30th birthday quite recently. Um, the image tag, the old image tag, and literally the original image tag, from Mark Andreessen's first suggestion for it still works. So,
Mm.
image tags work in the same way that they did 30 years ago. And most people, if they're writing and using an image tag, they will write it in the same way as people did then. They will, img source equals so and so and width and height and that kind of thing. And it still works, and it looks great. And this is the problem is that this is a kind of false sense of security,
Hmm.
because you do that, you put it on your site, it looks fine. I mean, it looks good. Probably looks as good as it's going to look if you do it properly. But the problem is that this is going to really cause problems with your performance. And for a lot of people, they don't realize this until they do a lighthouse test or web vitals or so on. And then you suddenly realize that you've done so many things wrong.
Hmm.
And it's kind of really unfair that it's one of these few things that looks right. It looks completely right on the page. You'll have it on there. You'll have chosen your image. You'll have put it on there, and it looks perfect. And there's Google coming along and telling you wrong. And the problem is it's a moving target as well. So
Hmm.
these rules change. Now, the way that image tags they work is they are always backward compatible. So all of these new things that have been added, they still, then the oldest 30-year-old image tags still work. It's just that you have these extra bits that you add into them. And unfortunately, all of these things that are very useful, they just get more and more and more complicated. And they are at the stage that now that, I wouldn't write these things by hand. They are, try creating a source set by hand. It's just not something that people want to do. So from that point, just the HTML is complicated. And that's without getting into the parts of actually getting the images into the right format. Originally, images were, GIFs and BMPs and stuff. And, eventually we got JPEGs and PNGs. But now, you want to be using modern formats, and that means WebP or AVIF. But it's just like, how are you going to know where? I mean, what things support which? Those are moving targets as well. And there are things that make it easier. And I see it as our job as tool makers, framework makers, to make this kind of thing easy for people, because we are in the perfect position for doing this. It shouldn't be so hard for the rest of us as site builders to be able to make these things work well. Um,
Yeah, you almost have an
it's
issue on
like
both sides. Like if you're beginning as a dev, like the image tag can be one of the most complex tags you're using, and so it's hard to kind of know. And because it works, if you just throw a source in there, um, it's it's hard to know how to improve that. And if you're a more advanced developer, and you're especially if you're coming from another framework, then it can be really difficult to like have to roll a lot of your own stuff. So one of the things I've always really respected about Astro is when it implements an API, it's always like the best version of that API. So yeah, I'd be curious a little bit more on what you feel like that is and where you feel like Astro is on that journey, because I know there's things you'd still want to improve about it as well.
absolutely. And I mean, I think there have frameworks have been helping with these things for a while. I said I worked at Gatsby before. Gatsby's had decent image processing things for a long time, and the developer experience was not necessarily the greatest at first, but they got better. And Next.js has made great strides in improving its image handling, and it's been one of these things where Astro, we added image support a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and that did the really important stuff, which was making sure you could process all your images, doing the asset handling, which is the really difficult part of it. The making sure that all of your images are being converted into the right formats and all that kind of stuff. So it and doing the kind of most low hanging fruit part of the high quality tags of lazy loading and things like that. And I have complained about browsers making things harder, but in some ways they did make things simpler as well, as they added more support for things. So like when I was first working on Gatsby images, both the Gatsby image component and the Next.js image component were doing all kinds of jumping through hoops to handle lazy loading and placeholders and things like that. But then support for lazy loading was added into the browsers. So we were able to go back and do them again with in a better with a better approach. And it was like both Gatsby and Next.js kind of started from scratch. Now Astro was in a great position, as we are with a lot of things, is that we generally wait around until the browsers support things. We don't try and kind of like paper over those things. We do things using the platform. So when Erica, who built the original Astro image stuff, was building it, she was able to put in the like natively by default, and was able to make them default to using WebP, which by that point had pretty much universal browser support as well. So those things do make it get easier. So from that respect, yes, it makes things get easier. But I think doing the Astro thing of like we've done with view transitions and so on, it's about, we want the support to be there in the browser. So this is kind of the approach we've taken. So we started out building this kind of pipeline that makes it easy to use the images and gives you a solid tag that gives you the best practices. But it gets you most of the way there, and we'll talk about where we've gone since that later. But that's kind of, this is the way that the path that we've been taking at Astro for these.
Yeah. Well, I know that the responsive images just shipped, I just had done a video on it as well, and I know we interacted a little bit about that afterwards. But I'd love to hear a little bit about that and kind of the thinking behind it, and just kind of talk us through that responsive image now in prod.
Yeah, well, I do recommend that everyone watching this goes back and watches that video that you did, because I watched it. I thought it was great, and it's why I asked if you would like me to come on the stream to talk about them, because it was a good, it's a good video talking about it. And it's very interesting seeing some of the things that you ran into, and what you found as being useful and so on. But I think maybe we can talk a bit about how the responsive images are, where they came from and where they've been going. And when the sort of the problem that the Astro image component has had up until now, up until responsive images, is that it gave you the tools to create the right sort of image component with the all of the best practices, but it didn't do a lot of it for you. So there are a couple of things that are the particularly difficult parts to do for images, but for responsive images. But I should probably start by saying what I mean by responsive images, defining what they actually are, because you've been talking about them quite a bit. But basically, what responsive images means is ways of displaying images on the web that give the best performance and best best speed, the best quality, whatever the device is that somebody is using. So this can mean that it smoothly resizes the images on a different device, or if you've got a particularly if you've got a screen that is able to be higher resolution, that it gives you the best quality for that. My screen went to sleep.
We still got you.
And yeah, you still got me. So in order to do that, you need to be able to have lots of different variations, different variants of the images, which is the part that you just don't want to do by hand. I mean, some brave people out there do create these things by hand, but really this is the thing where you want to be able to have the tooling to do it. And the tooling is kind of there are two most important tags or attributes on the image tag for when you're doing responsive images. First is there is source set, and what that is you'll know the source attribute on an image tag tells you where the image is. Source set gives a list of all of the different sorts of images that are available, and it's effectively saying to the browser, it's like a menu for the browser saying, here are all of these images, they're all of this same thing, and here are the different sizes of them. This is the width of each of these images, and it's basically telling the browser that it can choose which one of those it wants. And then the browser is able to use various hints and heuristics and things that it knows about to decide which ones of those to choose. And the most important ones are the width. It knows what size it is rendering the image, but it can also do things like network speed. So on mobile, Chrome, for example, it will download different images if you're on a cell network than if you are on Wi-Fi. So it detects that you're on, particularly if you're on a metered cell network, it knows that, it's got APIs to be able to tell that. It will not download the highest resolution images to display them, because it wants to save speed and save you money. And also, if you're running low on battery, it won't download such large images. So browsers are really clever. And it's best for these things to trust the browser. And this is why there is two ways that you can do source sets. There is the ones where it tells you, where you give the browser a list of the actual widths of the images. And then there are the one that people were familiar with first, because it was like the first one that came out, that tells it the different pixel densities of them. Now, if you're not if you haven't seen these like Act 2 and Act 2 2.x, you can ignore it because you shouldn't really use these. Now, that is a controversial thing. Some people very much disagree and said you should use them. I would say that most people shouldn't use them, which is kind of counterintuitive because they were brought in when you first had the Retina displays on, on phones and on Macs, higher resolution ones where you want a higher density image and you can get much better visibility for that. So what this was a way of telling the browser, look, here, I've got this beautiful double density image that you can display on your beautiful new iPhone 2 or whatever it was. I can't remember when it was. You download this one instead and display it. And that was what people used it for. And those still work. But what the Astro image responsive images do, and what all of the responsive images tools that I've worked on do, is it just says what the sizes are and lets the browser decide. Because the thing is, if you send a one that says it's double pixel density, the browser basically has to download that one. It's telling it, you must download this one. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Chrome disobeys that sometimes, but basically the spec says you must download that. Whereas if you just tell it the widths that are available, the spec says that the browser can choose. And in these situations, we say the browser knows better and let it choose which ones it wants. So
generally, you should do the widths because it gives the browser the option. And then you can also, I'm assuming, because you can give more widths, you also give the browser more options to choose between. Whereas with the pixel densities, you don't really have that many densities to choose from. Usually, I mean,
absolutely,
I guess you could provide a bunch, but.
And what that also allows is it allows for images that can be displayed at different sizes. So if you have a responsive layout where your page, you've got the same HTML that, what we all, most sites that we build these days are designed to work on desktop and mobile, and tablets and all sorts of displays, but they're designed to be responsive and display in not the same way, but in a way that works on both of them. And obviously, if you're displaying the same image on each of those, that is not necessarily going to be working the way that you want, because what you don't want is your 2,500 pixel wide beautiful hero image displaying using the same one on your little phone. It doesn't make sense at all. It's a waste of bandwidth. It's a waste of processing power. It's just not something that you should be doing. So by providing these different widths, you're able to then say, this is this one is available. You've got a smaller screen. How about downloading this? So the thing there is you provide this menu of them. But you've got to then decide what those are.
Well, that's really helpful. I didn't understand that distinction. So, yeah, I do have a question about the picture tag, and I don't know if this gets us too far off. So you can veto it if you want to, but
yeah.
Like if somebody wanted to know what's the main difference between like using a source set and using a picture tag, yeah, if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
So a picture tag and a source set there is a subtle difference between them, and a picture tag is it's another way of giving a menu of different images, but almost everything that a picture tag does would generally be better handled by, for most people, would be better handled by just an image tag with a source set. So what you can do with a picture tag is you can set rules for when things are going to be being displayed. And we're getting back to there where I'm saying, this is telling the browser what to download in different circumstances. Now, what that is doing is you will then set like media queries and stuff and tell it explicitly which things to download. Now, what that is useful for, and which one I would recommend it for, is if you're doing art direction. Mm-hmm. So if you are saying on a phone, I don't just want it to choose a variant of a different size, because a source set, the key thing of a source set is each one of those should be the same image, but just at a different size. So the resolution is the only thing that's different. Aspect ratio, subject, everything should be the same if you are doing a source set. Whereas with a picture tag, the images can be completely different. Now, you don't normally want them to be completely different, but they are, they give you the ability to do that. So what you can do is you can say have a landscape hero image for desktop, and then you could have a square image on a phone, and that's, you know, that's super useful. The other thing you can use it for is for offering different formats to different browsers. Now, that was particularly useful back in the day when there wasn't wide browser support for formats like WebP and AVIF. Nowadays, they all support WebP and AVIF, basically. So that use is not particularly helpful anymore unless you're supporting really ancient browsers, in which case, you know, you're on your own. So the most of the things that you want to be doing are, you know, generally, if you're just basically all you're wanting to do is make sure you're delivering the right size image in a good format to the browser, you don't need to use a picture tag for that. And the but you can, I mean, one of my favorite tricks that you can do with a picture tag is that the media query that you use to target them, it's not, you don't just have to use the screen size one. You can use you can use any of the media query things that it supports. And my favorite one is to do different image for dark mode. And now that is not something that I've seen people trying much in the wild, but it works, and it's a really cool effect that you can do. You can have it choose a completely different image for dark mode, and it's just done purely using the picture tag with no, you know, no JavaScript or anything like that. So, and you could do stuff like, you know, have a different image for prefers reduced motion or anything like that, which, you know, is a bit of a toy, really. You know, it's if you're actually using a GIF, for example, you know, instead of using a video, that's the sort of thing that you could do there. You could have one that's a GIF and one, or, you know, one that's a animated PNG and one that's a static one, and, you know, that's that sort of thing. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about a lot of those use cases, but the media query does kind of open that up.
yeah. So I will drop in the chat when I've finished this a demo that I made that that shows using the that media query stuff for weird tricks. So
I like that. Well, let me try to summarize a lot of that just to make sure I'm following you and hopefully help us all recap. So generally speaking, image tag versus picture tag. The picture tag is mostly useful today for art direction. If on different screen sizes, you want to tell the browser, not only do I want different sizes, but I want a different image. And so that's really the main use case. Or if you have some like outside the box media query for dark mode, you want to show a specific image versus light mode. But it is more directive. You're actually telling the browser use this, and kind of like with the densities in the source set for the image tag, the browser kind of doesn't have a choice. It has to take that unless it breaks, you know, from the spec. So as a whole, you should use the image tag. Obviously, you want to set a width and a height so that it has, you know, it's not, the layout shift isn't extreme when it loads, but then you'll give it a source set. And while you have the option of pixel densities, or you have the option of the widths, you should typically choose the widths because it gives the browser more options, and it lets the browser choose based on a variety of factors like battery, signal you have, all that kind of stuff, so that the browser has more control and more options as well. Is that mostly where we're at?
Absolutely, yes. And then the other thing is never use triple pixel density. Just there is no reason to do it. Your human eye cannot see the difference, so don't bother with that one. That's a, you know, I seen it sometimes the 3x ones on there, and it's just like all you're doing there is just giving, you know, giving money to your cell carrier or whatever. You know, that's all you're going to achieve on that one. But yeah, so the important thing there is that you then have to choose which things to put in the source set, and that's another difficult thing. And it's something that I first had to deal with when I was at Gatsby, when I was working on the image component there, is because, you know, Gatsby, their images at the time were all pre-rendered, so you didn't want to, you know, have too many, because that costs a lot in terms of time and processing and not everything, and your build minutes and things like that. And that's obviously something that we have to think about with Astro as well. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you've got enough of them to cover the right, hit the different right bases and so on, for making sure that the right image is available. So it doesn't have to download an image that's way bigger than the screen, because that's also, that's punishing your users rather than, for yourself. Now, that there are kind of different situations there, though, because in some case, this is a bigger question when you are having to generate these images at build time. But I think if people are at all able, they should be using an image CDN, because they are able to do both. They are able to make these things get transformed when they're needed, but they can also do clever stuff like content negotiation. So they can send an AVIF if the browser supports AVIF, or WebP if it doesn't. So it's able to do clever stuff like that. And then, so these image CDNs they're going to be dedicated ones like Cloudinary or ImageX, or they are the ones that give you the full lot of special image CDN tools. Or they can be the ones that are built into your host. So both Netlify and Vercel have image CDNs that just work out of the box, and Cloudflare have got 2 different image CDN options, because of course that you need to opt into, and there are a lot of them out there. So I think those are ones where it's like, if you use those, then effectively the source set is free. It doesn't matter how many of those that you generate, but it does mean that there's these kind of different situations about what you want to do. But basically what you want to be able to do is make sure that you've got every size that the browser might want to request. You've got an image source set that's either that size or a little bit bigger, and it's a balance. And particularly if you're doing these pre-generated ones, you've got to think, okay, so what are the widths of the screens that this is going to be requested at? What are the pixel densities of the screens? And how is the image going to resize? Is it going to be a full width one? Is this a hero image, or is it an image that's a constrained one that will be displayed smaller than full width on a desktop, but when the browser sizes down, it will size it down. Maybe it'll switch column layouts and stuff. Suddenly we're getting into some pretty complicated stuff there. Now, the way that I've approached it for this, which is a kind of what I feel is the kind of best balance, and this is what we've done for the Astro image, is we give some options of what your layout is going to be. So there are different things that you tell it what your image is going to do, because when you're writing the HTML, it's not going to know, unless we start actually rendering the whole thing and running a full CSS engine and stuff over it, we're not going to know how it's actually going to be displayed. And once you're doing that, you've had to have generated the images and stuff at that point anyways. So what we are doing is I've given, we've chosen 3 different layout ones, and they happen to be the same ones that we did at Gatsby and the same ones that I've used at Unpick, and they're pretty similar to the ones that are used by Next.js and things like that. Yes, there is a bit of a bit of a line going back. And the 3 things we've done there is full width, which are for images that always fill the full width of the container and will full width of the window, and that's basically hero images for, so it's a very specific thing, but it's a very common thing, and it's particularly large images, so it's the one that is most likely to need to be optimized. So that's why we've created a layout specifically for that. Then there is fixed, which is for things like little avatars and so on, which are never resized, so they will always be the same size. And then there is constrained, which is what most will want to use. And that the rules for constrained are pretty simple, not as simple as the other ones. They will display at the size that you've requested it, or the original size. So, if you've got an 800 by 600 image that you've put in the tag, say 800 by 600, or the original is 800 by 600, it will display it at 800 by 600 on your page. unless your screen is narrower than 800, in which case it will display at the width of the page. And that, that's the behavior that you will get by default with things like, if you say you've got tailwind, that will be what an image will do. It will never display bigger than its inherent size, but it will also never be bigger than its container. So it's not going to overflow off the side. So that is the kind of thing that we've got from the default. And then once we've got that, we can work back from that and think, what sort of sizes are you going to need? So simplest one, fixed size. You don't, there's only one size that it can be displayed, so you can provide two sources in your source set for that. That's the width that you've requested and 2 times the width that you've requested for your Retina displays, if the source image is big enough to be able to do that. Secondly, there's full width. You want, basically, it's because it's displayed the width of the screen at all times, you want the widths of every screen that it's likely to be. Now, maybe not every screen that's likely to be, but a reasonable number of them. And then for constrained, you want the width requested, twice the width requested, plus the widths of every screen that it might be that is smaller than its own inherent width. Now, you don't have to hold that in your head. We need to hold that in our heads, or rather, we need to hold it in our rules. And so what we've done there is I went and did a lot of reading up on real screen resolutions to find what was the set of breakpoints that's going to give you the best coverage without having like lots of ones that are very similar, without having to generate a huge number of images for each source. And then I've generated 2 lists of those. One of them, which is the full buffet for if you're using an image CDN. So if you're using the Netlify adapter, for example, with the Netlify CDN, the Netlify image CDN enabled on it, it will generate the full source set, and it will mean that it will deliver exactly the perfect one. You'll lose a few bytes in the size of the source set tag, but you will easily make that back by the fact that the images will always be just the right size for it. So, on a big image there, we could have maybe 12 sources on there for different screen widths. Or if it's going to be pre-generated, so if it's a static page with no image CDN, then it will generate a shorter list of maybe like 4 or 5 or something, depending on it, and to give a balance between the two of them.
And that's mostly for the build time, I'm assuming, because if you're building locally and you're waiting on 100 images that are each being generated by Astro, 4 times over, it'll just slow down your build pretty significantly. Whereas if that's done on a CDN, then that can kind of be done remotely and brought in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key with the CDN as well is it's only generated when it's needed, and then it will be cached forever. So, the first person who views it, who is probably you, will have a slightly slower load, but everyone else won't need to wait around, and it will be shipped out. And these image CDNs are really good at their caching. They've got multi-level tiered caches, so it will only get transformed once, and then it will get spread out to all of their different caches around the world. And when I was at Netlify, I was kind of given this amazing ability to help design the way that their image CDN was implemented. So I was able to make sure it did all the stuff that I wanted an image CDN to do. So I was able to get the sort of, the whole end-to-end thing there. And
now
they all do that.
Fit something that would work well with what you did.
Exactly. I'm just sort of making sure my career moves around between those things. And then, so you generate all of those things, and then you need to make sure that the image then sizes right, and also that the browser knows which ones it's going to load, because you don't want it to wait until it's rendered the actual image container, because when it's done that, then that it can start downloading it. But if it waits until it knows what the size of the thing is, it's not able to do any preloading. When it does the scan of the HTML, it's not going to be able to say, oh, these are the images that I need to preload. And that's a big difference. So the way that you do that is we also have the sizes attribute, which is another media query attribute that it shows on that you add to the image tag. And that is basically rules the syntax for that is basically a load of rules for what size it will be displayed according to what media query things it's gonna be using, and the browser is then able to look at that and say, hey, I know that my screen width is 1024 pixels wide, so I know that that means that it's going to want me to download that this image will be displayed at 800 pixels wide. So I know that it's 800 pixels wide, so I know that I need to download the 1600 pixel image because I know that I've also got a double density retina display. So that's another thing that you need to think about. These are all things that I'm throwing at you as things you need to think about, but you don't if your framework does it for you. So this is what we're saying, by giving you this framework, giving you the choosing the layout, it's able to then also generate the sizes thing, which gives it the hints. So the full width one, the rule on that is very easy. It's 100W. So it's, the width of the screen. Whereas if it's a static one, it's easy. The width is the width that you've passed into it. Constrained is 2 rules. It's basically width of the screen until it is the width is larger than 800 pixels, at which point it will be displayed at 800 pixels. And that's the way that it's done. And we generate all of those for you. The final thing is making sure it actually resizes like that. Yeah. So that's like the next level of this. So in Astro, what we do is we optionally generate a few little style rules that you can that are automatically then applied to those images. Won't override styles very well, but we recommend most people opt into it, and what those will do is just apply a very small number of styles to the images that allow you to make sure that they resize in the way that it expects, and handles all the cropping and things like that working in the right way. So that's the other little bit on there.
There's so much complexity here that it's like as soon as you start pulling on one thread, you realize like, well, that touches all these different things. And so to kind of your opening line, like the framework should handle that. I shouldn't, as a dev, have to become an expert on how images are displayed, how browsers interact with them. I should be able to simply pass an image along and trust that the framework has my back. So it's really encouraging to me to know that like, not only does Astro have support for this, but like they have someone who's done this in a lot of different places. And I know when I did that video, I was like, this sounds like Matt's been around here. He's been the one doing this stuff. And that's been cool to kind of now hear a little bit more of the background, both your kind of technical background and also a lot of the details you're having to consider that I don't want to think about as a dev. I don't want to have to become an expert in images to just be able to have a blog or, have a landing page. So I'm really excited that Astro has this. I know we're kind of running short on time, and I want to be respectful of your time, especially as it took us a bit to get started. What else what's coming next in Astro? What with images in particular? Anything you want to show in particular? I know we had a bit of an issue earlier, but maybe we can even show some code if you want to. But yeah, any last things you want to share about Astro Images or where we're going next?
So, I mean, one thing that I would really love to be able to add to images at some point is the placeholder support, automatic placeholder support. It's a real pain point. The reason that we've not done it so far is because the problem with the placeholders when you automatically generate them is you need to load the image at build time to be able to find so you're able to do stuff like generate the blurred hash or the low res image or the dominant color thing in there. And the problem with that is that means that it won't work with remote images unless you are at build time loading those images, resizing them and doing the processing and stuff on it, which is going to get really, really slow. So effectively, we've got some options on the way that we can do this. It's something that I've done with my own library, which, we've sort of briefly mentioned, but we're not touched on detail. But the problem there is that these have to hit the images at build time. So there are definitely things that could be done. So we could have it saying that it only works for pre-generated, pre-rendered pages. It doesn't work for dynamic pages, images at all, and you've got to deal with that. Now, that's not something that I like. That doesn't feel like something that, because it's sort of magic. Then people are
Yeah.
like, oh, so this image is being used on a non pre-rendered page. This is an on-demand rendered page, so images on there can't use the can't have placeholders, and what happens there? Because the reason is that if you're rendering this image on demand, in order to generate the placeholder in the back, the server would have to download the image itself, generate the background thing, then send the HTML to you, and then your browser will then also just request the image, and that's just not feasible.
Yeah.
That's too slow. So there are things that can be done around that. There can be ways of caching it and things like that, which we would need to work out. Or there can be just a case of saying, sorry, it only works for pre-rendered pages. That might be something that would be useful. But basically, that is something that I would really like to be able to solve for people, because it is a big pain point. It's an annoying thing to have to do, and it's something that really we should be making easier for people. So that is something that I would really very much like to be able to solve for Astro. So if people have got thoughts on it, hop into Discord and give some ideas, because at the moment I don't really know what's the best solution for that, and it's not something that we've really talked about in any detail.
Yeah.
But it's it's something that's been sort of churning around at the back of my mind as something that we could do better.
Yeah. Well, the placeholders are really nice from a UX perspective, but you have to implement it in a way that's not bad for a DX. Ultimately, and that sounds like quite the challenge. And I didn't actually realize the difference between the pre-rendered and non-pre-rendered pages, so that's helpful to know as well. I think it just happens to be that I'm using on a lot of pre-rendered pages. Now, Unpick works that same way. Is that right?
Yeah, so because Unpick only uses, so I mean, to give some context for people, Unpick is the image library that I made before I joined Astro. That what it does is it's like it works across like 10 different frameworks as image components that are sort of similar to what we're doing for these, for and I did it inspired by Gatsby, but it only works with image CDNs because it doesn't do any build time optimization or anything. All it does is generate the right URLs. So say you're using it with Cloudinary or something, it will generate a Cloudinary URL with the right source set for all of the different right sizes that you've got. And it works well because most images that you're using, even when you're not using an image CDN, are actually served from an image CDN that sometimes it can reverse engineer. So like if you're loading it from a CMS, almost all of those are an image CDN, so you can change the URL params. Or if you're getting it from Unsplash or Shopify or anything like that, all of those, it'll work with that. So that's what it can do from there. And because of that, we can do things that are a bit more tricky that wouldn't normally be able to be done at build time, and that we couldn't rely on for Astro, like requesting a tiny image. So what Unpick does is it requests an 8-pixel wide image from the image CDN,
Yeah.
which is fast enough to be able to do at runtime, because
Yeah.
it's just less than a kilobyte, and then it can use that as the basis for a background image and stuff. So it's able to do those sort of tricks, which we can't rely on for with Astro, because we can't build a feature that only works for certain deploy targets.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and that helps kind of give some more context to that. So, well, this has been so much fun to chat through images. I think like my summary is like, number one, images are way more complex than you think. Number two, Astro actually like has your back, and again, I think it means a lot to see your background and like your expertise in the area. And it makes me not want to have to be an expert because I can let you be the expert. And then also like I think the image and picture distinction and talking about the width versus densities, like that was super helpful for me. And then also understanding some more of the complexities about these future features we're wanting to play with and kind of explore in Astro. Like that gives me a lot of sympathy, and also, yeah, just excitement to see, what creative solutions come out of this, because that's what that friction produces ultimately, is creativity. And I think that's something I've really appreciated about Astro and kind of the core team is because of the stage we're at right now, where we have several more advanced frameworks that have been around for a bit. you can kind of come in, survey the landscape, think creatively, and then pick the best solution. And I think that's a really privileged spot to be in. And of course, all of those frameworks in the past have had that spot too at their time. But now to kind of be able to build on a lot of what the web has produced over the last, couple decades, I just feel like we're in such a sweet spot for the web, and images are no exception.
Well, I'm very happy to be the person that does the nerding out about the complexities of image tags because it's something I find interesting. But I equally feel as strongly that it shouldn't be something that everybody else has to think about because most of you, it's not something that you should, you should be concentrating on making your sites amazing and beautiful and responsive and high performance and generally delightful. And we can, as framework authors, if I'm able to spend a day or a week making your images better for everybody, then it's a better use of my time. So that's kind of my overall feeling about dev tools in general, is that let's if we can automate stuff to make things easy for you, it's worth us putting in a lot of work to make something easy because it will make it easy for hundreds of thousands of people building these sites.
Yeah. What a cool time to be alive, where we can all, in a sense, kind of collaborate, play to our strengths, and then build better stuff. I think that's one of the things that I've always really loved about the web development community as a whole, especially the open source community, is like you don't have to be an expert everywhere, because there are people who are willing to be experts and then share their knowledge, which means we can all go further. And that's a cool vibe to be a part of. And I appreciate your willingness to be the expert in images, so I don't have to. Anything else you'd like to share before we close up the stream?
No, I mean, yeah, I'm just equally. I'm really glad that there was all those experts who were able to be expert on the bits of it that I don't know about or can't, understand, that are way beyond me. And Astro itself is built on the shoulders of all the people building things like Vite and Sharp and all these kind of projects that are out there that we rely on. So that's open source, isn't it great? And
it's great.
What a great place to be.
What a great time to be alive. Well, Matt, thanks so much. And thanks for everyone for your patience, especially as we got the stream up and going. Hopefully everything was smooth. It seems like it the rest of the time. And I will catch you in the next one. Matt, thanks so much for joining me again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Well,
we'll
that's
see you
great.
later.
All right. Bye then.
All right. Bye.